Why Americans started using Navajo code talkers and then the left Japanese codebreakers Ruthless. February 28, 1942. Camp Elliot, San Diego, California. The pencil hovered above paper as Major James Jones watched something that contradicted every principle of military cryptography he had ever learned. 4 Navajo men stood before him, transmitting battlefield messages in 20 seconds flat, messages that would take encryption machines 30 minutes to encode. The words flowing through the radio made no sense to him, they sounded like nothing he had ever heard. Yet these 4 men, recruited just days earlier from Los Angeles, decoded each message perfectly, instantly, without error. Major Jones had spent 20 years in military communications. He knew codes. He knew ciphers. He knew that breaking enemy communications could win wars, and that the Japanese had already proven they could crack every American code system in use. The Marines were losing the cryptographic war before they even began fighting in the Pacific. But what he witnessed that morning would change everything. 420 Navajo Marines would eventually create the only unbreakable code in modern military history, a code so perfect that Japan's chief of intelligence would later admit they never came close to breaking it. The story begins not in 1942, but 24 years earlier in October 1918. 8 Choctaw soldiers serving with the American Expeditionary Force in France were placed on telephones during the Meuse-Argonne offensive. They spoke to each other in their native language. The Germans, who had been tapping American phone lines and reading every message, suddenly went silent. They could intercept the transmissions but could not understand a single syllable. The Choctaw language belonged to the Muscogean linguistic family found only in North America. No German cryptographer had ever encountered it. The 8 Choctaw code talkers gave American forces a crucial advantage in the final months of World War I, but military leaders forgot this lesson. The program ended with the war. The achievement was filed away and largely forgotten until December 7, 1941. Pearl Harbor revealed a terrifying truth about American military communications. The Japanese were reading American codes almost as fast as Americans could send them. Japanese intelligence services had been preparing for this war for years. Their codebreakers had cracked the Gray Code, the Brown Code, and numerous military systems. By early 1942, the situation had become critical. The Japanese could intercept American radio messages and break the codes within hours, sometimes minutes. Worse, they were using their English language skills to create havoc on American communications, broadcasting false orders to set up ambushes. Major Howard Connor, who would later command code talkers at Iwo Jima, described the problem: every code we used, the Japanese broke, every cipher, every encryption system, every mechanical device. They had brilliant cryptographers and unlimited time to work on our messages. We needed something they had never seen before, could never prepare for, and could never crack even if they captured our equipment. The existing American encryption systems were not only vulnerable, they were painfully slow. The M94 cipher machine required 30 minutes to encode a 3-line message, another 30 minutes to decode it on the receiving end. In the fast-moving battles of the Pacific, this delay was often fatal. Enter Philip Johnston. Born in 1892 in Topeka, Kansas, Johnston was not Navajo. His parents were missionaries who moved to the Navajo reservation in Arizona when Philip was 4 years old. He grew up among the Navajo people, learning their language, absorbing their culture. By age 9, Johnston spoke Navajo fluently enough to serve as interpreter for a Navajo delegation sent to Washington to lobby for tribal rights. By his teenage years, he was one of perhaps 30 non-Navajo people in the entire world who could speak the language with any degree of fluency. Johnston served in World War I, returned to Los Angeles, and worked as an engineer for the city water department. By December 1941, Philip Johnston was 49 years old, comfortably settled in his career, far removed from his childhood on the reservation. Then he read a newspaper article in February 1942 describing Army training maneuvers where Native American soldiers had transmitted messages in their tribal languages. Johnston understood something that few others in America could grasp: the Navajo language was not just difficult, it was virtually impossible for outsiders to learn. Navajo belongs to the Athabascan language family. It has no alphabet. No written form existed until American missionaries created one in the 1920s. The language relies heavily on tonal qualities, where the same sound means different things depending on pitch and emphasis. Its syntax bears no resemblance to English, Japanese, German, or any European or Asian language. Johnston knew that during the 1920s and 30s, Germany and Japan had sent students to study Native American tribes. They had learned Cherokee, Choctaw, and Comanche, but they had never studied Navajo. The reservation was too isolated, the language was too difficult. The day after reading the article, Johnston went to the Naval office in Los Angeles. He told them his idea: use Navajo speakers as radio operators, let them transmit messages in their native language. The Japanese would never break it because they had no starting point, no reference, no way into the language. Johnston had 2 weeks to organize a demonstration. He found 4 Navajo volunteers in Los Angeles. On February 27, 1942, Johnston and his volunteers traveled to Camp Elliot. February 28, 1942. 0900 hours. Major Jones and Major General Clayton Bogle assembled in a communications room. They had invited skeptical staff officers. Everyone expected this demonstration to fail. Johnston placed 2 of his Navajo volunteers in one room, 2 in another room 50 yards away. He connected them by field telephone. Then he handed the first pair a written message in English: enemy expected to make tank and dive bomber attack at dawn. The first Navajo man read the message, picked up the field telephone, and spoke in Navajo. 20 seconds. The receiving Navajo man wrote down the message in English: enemy tank dive bomber expected to attack this morning, virtually verbatim. The machine translation would have taken 30 minutes and required code books that could be captured. Major Bogle immediately wrote a letter to the Commandant of the Marine Corps. He recommended recruiting 200 Navajo men immediately. The letter was dated March 6, 1942. The Corps approved the pilot program, 30 Navajo recruits. If it worked, they would expand. On May 4, 1942, 29 Navajo men boarded a bus at Fort Defiance, Arizona. They were transported to Fort Wingate, New Mexico, then sent to Marine Corps Recruit Depot San Diego. These 29 would become known as the Original 29. They completed 7 weeks of standard Marine Corps boot camp. On June 27, 1942, Platoon 382 graduated. They were immediately sent to Camp Elliot for specialized training. Their mission was unprecedented. They had to create a military code using their own language. The challenge was formidable. Military communications required hundreds of specialized terms: tank, submarine, artillery, battalion. The Navajo language had no words for these modern military concepts. The solution was brilliant. The code talkers created 2 types of code. Type 1 was an alphabet system. They assigned Navajo words to each letter of the English alphabet. But instead of using just one word per letter, they created multiple words to prevent frequency analysis. The letter could be represented by Wulachi, which means ant, or Basana, which means apple, or Shushnil, which means axe. This prevented Japanese cryptographers from using statistical analysis to break the code. Type 2 was direct word substitution for common military terms. Submarine became Beshlo, which translates as iron fish. Battleship became Dahitai Hai, or whale. Fighter plane became Dahitai Hai, hummingbird. Bomber became Hila-Chos, buzzard. The code talkers organized ships and aircraft by their characteristics. Ships were fish because they moved through water, aircraft were birds because they flew. This system made intuitive sense to Navajo speakers but would be incomprehensible to outsiders. The original code contained 211 terms. Within months, it expanded to 411 military vocabulary terms. This final dictionary, combined with the Type 1 alphabet substitution system, created a code of remarkable depth and flexibility. Every term had to be memorized during training, nothing was written down in the field. By August 1942, the original 29 had completed their training. They had created a fully functional military code using the Navajo language. They could encode, transmit, and decode messages at speeds that amazed their instructors. The code talkers began deploying to combat units in late 1942. The first group was assigned to the 1st Marine Division fighting at Guadalcanal. August 7, 1942. Guadalcanal. The first Navajo code talkers arrived in the combat zone and immediately went to work. Within hours, they were transmitting battlefield communications in their native language over open radio channels. The results astounded Marine commanders. Messages that previously took 30 minutes to encode and another 30 minutes to decode now flew across the airwaves in seconds. Artillery coordinates, enemy positions, troop movements, all transmitted instantly in a code that no one could break at Guadalcanal. Code talkers worked around the clock in the oppressive heat and humidity of the Solomon Islands. They operated from foxholes, command posts, and forward observation positions. Despite these conditions, the code talkers maintained perfect accuracy in their transmissions. But the code talkers faced unexpected challenges beyond enemy fire. American Marines who had never heard Navajo sometimes mistook the code talkers for Japanese infiltrators. The guttural sounds, the unfamiliar tones, the rapid speech patterns sounded nothing like English. Several code talkers reported being held at gunpoint by fellow Marines who suspected they were enemy soldiers. The solution was to assign each code talker a bodyguard who would protect them from both enemy action and friendly fire. The Japanese response to the Navajo transmissions revealed just how effective the code was. Japanese radio operators recorded every transmission. They sent the recordings to cryptographic units for analysis. The results baffled them. Japanese intelligence had broken almost every American military code. They employed thousands of skilled cryptographers. They had unlimited time and resources. Yet, the Navajo transmissions made no sense whatsoever. They tried frequency analysis, the standard method for breaking substitution codes, but the multiple substitutes for each letter defeated this approach. They tried comparing messages, looking for repeated phrases, but the Navajo code talkers varied their transmissions deliberately. Japanese intelligence tried linguistic analysis. They brought in every language expert they could find. None of them recognized the sounds. The language was unlike anything in their experience. The Japanese code name for the Navajo transmissions revealed their frustration. They called it the incomprehensible language. One report stated that the sounds appeared almost inhuman, as if American forces had developed some form of mechanical speech synthesizer. By late 1942, Japanese commanders were receiving warnings from their intelligence services. The Americans were using some form of unbreakable code on tactical communications. All attempts at decryption had failed. At Tarawa in November 1943, code talkers transmitted and received over 800 messages during the 76-hour battle. Not a single error was recorded. Japanese forces intercepted many of these transmissions but gained zero intelligence value from them. At Peleliu in September 1944, code talkers coordinated the entire amphibious assault. They handled all communications between ships, aircraft, and ground forces for 73 days under some of the worst conditions in the Pacific War. But the true test came at Iwo Jima, February 19, 1945. The largest amphibious assault in the Pacific War. 6 Navajo code talkers worked around the clock during the first 48 hours of the battle. They transmitted over 800 messages in 2 days. Every message was transmitted in Navajo. Every message was decoded instantly. Every message was completely accurate. Major Howard Connor stated it plainly in his after-action report, "Were it not for the Navajos, the Marines would never have taken Iwo Jima." The Japanese never stopped trying to break the code. Even as their empire crumbled, their cryptographers continued working on the Navajo transmissions. They devoted significant resources to the problem. In one incident that revealed both Japanese determination and the code's strength, a Navajo Army soldier named Joe Kiyomiya was captured at Baton in April 1942. Kiyomiya was Navajo, fluent in the language, but he was not a code talker. He had never been trained in the code. Japanese intelligence officers brought Kiyomiya to a communications room. They played recordings of Navajo code talker transmissions. They ordered him to translate. Kiyomiya listened carefully. He heard Navajo words he recognized, but the messages made no sense. He heard words like wachi, which means ant. He heard beshlo, which means iron fish. But strung together, these words formed no coherent message. What Kiyomiya could not know was that these were code words. Wulachi was the letter A, beshlo meant submarine. Without training in the code, even a fluent Navajo speaker could not decode the messages. He told his captors the truth: the words were Navajo, but the message was gibberish. The Japanese did not believe him. They tortured him. They stripped him naked and forced him to stand in deep snow until his feet froze to the ground. This incident demonstrated the code's brilliance. Even a fluent Navajo speaker who was not trained in the code could not break it. After the war, Lieutenant General Chao Arisu, Japan's chief of intelligence, confirmed what many had suspected: Japanese cryptographers had broken numerous American codes throughout the war, but they never broke the Marine Corps code. They never even came close. By war's end, approximately 400 Navajo men had served as code talkers. 13 were killed in action. They served with all 6 Marine divisions. Their contribution was immeasurable. But when they came home in 1945 and 1946, there were no parades, no public recognition. They were ordered to maintain absolute secrecy about their service. The Code Talker program remained classified. The military kept the code classified until 1968. The decision to keep the code classified for 23 years had profound implications. The Code Talkers could not speak about their service. They could not share their experiences with anyone outside the Code Talker community. Even when the program was declassified in 1968, public recognition came slowly. The Code Talkers themselves rarely spoke about their service. Many suffered from what would now be recognized as post-traumatic stress disorder, but gradually recognition grew. In 1982, President Ronald Reagan declared August 14 as National Navajo Code Talkers Day. In 2001, President George W. Bush presented gold medals to the 4 surviving members of the original 29. President Bush's remarks captured the significance of their achievement. We recall a story that all Americans can celebrate and every American should know. It is a story of ancient people called to serve in a modern war. It is a story of the only unbreakable oral code of World War II. Above all, it is a story of young Navajos who brought honor to their nation and victory to their country. The Navajo Code Talkers faced a bitter irony. Many had attended government boarding schools where they were punished for speaking Navajo. American education policies sought to eliminate Native American languages and cultures. Yet, in World War II, America needed these languages. The Code Talkers were asked to use the language they had been punished for speaking. They served anyway. This reflected a profound patriotism that transcended past injustices. When they returned home after the war, many struggled to access veterans' benefits. The reservation infrastructure did not support the GI Bill programs that transformed post-war America for white veterans. Yet, their legacy transformed American military communications. The success of the Navajo Code Talkers proved that linguistic security could be as effective as technological security. Their story became a powerful symbol of Native American patriotism. Despite centuries of broken treaties, forced relocations, and discrimination, Native Americans have served in every American war at rates higher than any other ethnic group. The last of the original 29 Code Talkers, Chester Nez, passed away on June 4, 2014, at age 93. The mathematical impact of the Code Talkers is difficult to quantify but undeniably significant. Tens of thousands of messages transmitted with 0 errors over 3 years of combat. Communication speeds increased from 30 minutes to 20 seconds. Perfect security against an enemy that had cracked virtually every other American code. At Iwo Jima alone, the 6 Code Talkers working the first 48 hours transmitted information that directly affected the survival of thousands of Marines. The Code Talkers' achievement demonstrated something profound about human intelligence and cultural knowledge. The most sophisticated cryptographic machines of the era could not match the security provided by human language and memory. The legacy of the Code Talkers extends beyond their World War II service. They changed how America views its indigenous peoples. They demonstrated that Native American languages and cultures were assets, not liabilities. Today, fewer than 200,000 people speak Navajo. The language faces challenges, but the legacy of the Code Talkers has inspired efforts to preserve and teach the Navajo language. The Code Talkers transformed their language from a liability in the eyes of American society into one of America's most valuable military assets. They proved that indigenous knowledge has power. They showed that diversity strengthens rather than weakens national defense. The Navajo Code Talkers left Japanese codebreakers baffled. They gave American forces a decisive advantage. They saved countless lives. They helped win the war, and they did it all by speaking the language of their people, the language that proved unbreakable when their nation needed it.